Hello, and welcome back to the War of Ideas podcast. This is Cody Symbol, going to tackle something that's been in the news recently and for the past couple of years, actually, but it keeps gaining more and more traction as the days go by, and that is universal basic income. For those who don't know, universal basic income means every person, I think it's ages of 18 to 64 or 65, everyone in that age range gets a certain sum of money every month, unconditionally. You don't have to work, you don't have to do anything but be a citizen. The government gives you the check in the mail, and you're on your way. What is being proposed by most people, like the presidential candidate Andrew Yang for 2020, is $1,000 a month. That seems like a good number to me. I'm not sure if it's the best. I'm not sure if I would go lower or higher, but that's the type of number I'll be basing my thoughts around. Right off the bat, I want to say I don't think it's the best possible solution, or even close, to the problems that the middle class of America is facing right now. But me and apparently everyone else is too stupid to think of a better one, because this is the best one I can see being proposed right now, or at least something that will lead us in the right path. The right path in terms of how people view jobs and what the role of a job is in an individual's life and in society as a whole. And UBI can spark something in people to hopefully help make them realize what jobs are really for. So, yeah, no surprise here. I am for UBI, and let's talk about why. So, first big question, how will we pay for it? Well, most of it will be paid for by taxing the rich more. And a lot of that taxation money will come from the value added tax. This is an idea by Andrew Yang that basically means all of the money that corporations store offshore overseas, yeah, they're going to have to pay taxes on that. I think I read somewhere there's an estimated 5% of the entire global economy in offshore tax haven money. So that would pay for about 60% of UBI in America. And the rest will more or less come from the money you save, the money the government saves, by not having to pay for homeless people on the street, by less people going to prison, because the more money you have, the less likely you are to go to prison, and paying less on social programs like disability. You won't be able to get both disability and UBI if you're already being helped by the government. If you're already being helped by the government with disability or food stamps, things like that, you cannot get both UBI and disability. You can choose one or the other, though, whichever you prefer, and we will save money that way. There will be a lot less people on these welfare programs. And there are a few other things that make up the final 100 or 200 billion or so. Chump change. And the second question people might have, after how are we going to pay for it, is won't business owners and landlords just raise the prices on housing and food and services? Well, I don't have a great answer for something like that. You're probably right. Things will increase in price, but not directly proportional. You won't be spending $1,000 more per month on food and rent. And when it comes down to it, people raising prices like that is just based on greed and what they can get away with. They won't have to raise prices in order to continue living a healthy, happy life themselves. If prices weren't raised in any way, shape, or form, business owners and landlords would still be richer than they were before because of UBI. So people raising prices isn't really the program's fault, it's the people's fault. The more money people have, the more people are willing to spend that money, and the more people are going to want to exploit others and take that money from them. That does not give us a reason to justify nobody making money or nobody earning money. Since capitalism would still exist in this scenario, the system of encouraging other people to find a way to make other people spend money and give money to you would still exist, of course. So really, if we're going to keep capitalism, we have to rely on business owners and landlords not being greedy and not taking more just because they have the upper hand, just because they can. Especially for things like rent and groceries, things that people cannot live without. The people paying for rent and paying for groceries have no bargaining power whatsoever. They're not the ones creating the competition. They have to rely on other business owners and other landlords to create that competition and to keep the prices low. The people do not decide the prices because they have to buy groceries somewhere and they have to rent an apartment somewhere. The best we can hope for is prices of everything will not rise too much and you'll still be better off. And hope that competition is the reason that prices do not rise. I look at things from a will this benefit more humans than before perspective, and not a how does this affect the stock market perspective or the unemployment rate. By the way, speaking of the stock market, the top 20% wealthiest people in America own 92% of the stock market, and the bottom 80% own the other 8%. So think about that the next time you see people excited that the NASDAQ is up 20 points. If you consider the economy the growth of companies and not the monetary gain of normal everyday people, then yes, the stock market going up is very good for the economy. I think we have to keep reminding people that jobs exist and the stock market exists and the US dollar currency exists because it is more conducive to human happiness and flourishing than not having these things. Having a job is not about finding meaning and showing off your value to your fellow human beings. It's okay that some people turn it into a contest. Hey, I make more money than you. Hey, I have a job and you don't. And it's okay that these competitions exist, but I think a lot more people would be in favor of UBI if they all realized at the base level your job doesn't exist to make you happy, and your job also doesn't exist to make you money. Your job exists because it is a net gain for society. You are improving the lives of others more than you are degrading your own by doing something you hate or doing something you love for 40 hours a week or 80 hours a week or 5 hours a week. It is a net gain in human flourishing. And if the economy as it is today does not have human happiness and flourishing as its number one reason for existing, then we are doing something wrong. The unemployment rate is 3.8% as of June 2018. I believe that is the lowest since the year 2000. And if it goes any lower, we'll have to go back to the 1960s to pinpoint the last time it was below 3.8 or 3.7%. And I know this might come off as me being an anti-Trump partisan, but yes, I'm going to tell you the unemployment rate really isn't that big of a deal. I would have said it for when Obama was in office and it was continuing to decline, but I wasn't making podcasts back then. But believe me, I would have said the same thing. There's another number, though. The labor force participation rate. And the labor force participation rate is the number of employed people and unemployed but looking for a job people as a percentage of the population aged 16 years and over. And that number for the United States is 62.7% as of May 2018. So that's higher than the number of people who are actually employed over the age of 16, because it includes unemployed people looking for work. So less than 63% of the US population is working, but 100% of the people, presumably, are able to live normal lives. So why is our livelihood tied to having a job if there are less than 200 million workers needed to supply 300 million people in America with what it needs? We don't need 100% labor participation for 100% upkeep of all the businesses out there. If we can serve 100% of the human population's needs with only 67% of it working, then we should be ecstatic about that. What about only 63% working, like it currently is? Even better. Labor force participation rate has gone from 67% to 63% in the past 2 decades. Should we be angry that there's 4% less people working, even though your packages get delivered to your door even faster than they used to? There's plenty of cashiers at the grocery store. There's plenty of food around. There's so many more businesses that have their own specific niche that you might have never even thought you needed before until you found out it existed. So we should be happy that the 4% extra people that aren't working are able to live their lives with even better service from workers than there used to be, and that they don't have to work. That they don't have to work to ensure that level of service. What would be the point of them getting a job if the level of service doesn't improve? If the business does not need them? We should be ecstatic that 1/3 of all Americans can live comfortable lives without having to do something they wouldn't otherwise do for 40 hours a week. I feel like I'm just paraphrasing the same idea over and over and over again, but I really want to hammer this one in. That 62.7% labor force participation rate number we have has been dropping for decades, and it may drop even lower as we get more advanced AI and become even more productive in the work environment. And we have become very productive in the work environment over the years. Businesses are pretty good at cutting operating costs and will try to stay as efficient and productive as possible. And that means not hiring as many employees. If they can get away with 5 instead of 10, they'll do it. If they can get away with 500 instead of 1,000, they'll do it. And even then, how many people do you know, or even yourself, complain about how they do nothing at their job and they're way too bored, it's a bullshit job, and it doesn't even need to exist? So businesses are pretty good at cutting people they don't need, but obviously not as good as they could be. And if you don't have any friends that tell you their job is useless and they hate it and it's boring, well, I have some data. I believe this is data from 2015. Internationally, 100,000 workers from 47 different countries, 8% of the workers perceive their job as useless, and another 17% are doubtful about the usefulness of their jobs. Also, in Britain, there is a poll. The percent of British working adults who think their job makes a meaningful contribution to the world. 37% say it does not, 13% say they do not know, and 50% say it does make a meaningful contribution. There's another poll, this time in the Netherlands. 40% of Dutch workers reported that their jobs had no reason to exist. I want to talk about someone named David Graeber, who, like Rutger Bregman, is also advocating for universal basic income. And he thinks that economies around the world have become vast engines for producing nonsense. He says we're living under a system called managerial feudalism, where most of the money comes from either rents or debt. In other words, the FIRE sector, which is finance, insurance, and real estate. We're used to thinking about the economy as production, but under managerial feudalism, the money flows to the elites, the owners, regardless of what workers do. And so doing becomes less important. People don't make as much money by making things anymore. They make it with rent and debt and insurance. I'll link to a good article talking about David Graeber's book, and let me take a piece of it to share with you here. Getting paid good money to do almost nothing is what defines the ruling class. Those on bullshit jobs are given a mimicry of the real thing, a taste at being the 1%, enough so that they are wrecked with the guilt only working class people could experience, having been raised on the notion that their duty is to actively contribute to society, enough so that they never draw attention at those making their fortunes without working. And Graeber also mentions in his book that people want to be useful. They want to contribute to society. People who are paid a lot to do their bullshit job, they aren't happy about that job. They might be happy that they're making money, but it takes a toll on you when you feel like you're not doing anything. And most of us know we feel happy when we help one of our friends out. When we do something nice for another human being, it makes us feel great. Another great line taken from the article by Mary Tracy: people have a sense of what makes a job worthwhile. Otherwise, they would not experience the cognitive dissonance of thinking that their jobs are meaningless and that they shouldn't be. So, if we have the premise that people want to do good and want to help others, then the first thing people think of in retaliation against UBI, saying something like, everyone is just gonna sit at home and play games all day and do nothing. Graeber shows us why that wouldn't be true, at least for most people. People want to help others, they're gonna find a way to do it. They're gonna find a way to make themselves feel good and be happy. If 40 hours of their week isn't being sucked up by a job, they're gonna find ways to help people. So out of the sub 63% of Americans that work, how many of them really could leave their job tomorrow and the company would be able to operate smoothly and even save some money? Probably a lot. We don't want to make things in businesses too rigid and too dependent on the only workers that are there. It's good to have people doing nothing sometimes because they're waiting just in case something breaks or in case they're needed. I understand that. That's fine. But that does not account for all of these people saying their jobs are useless. But as much as people hate their jobs, most of them would never advocate for the elimination of jobs. Why would they do that? Well, I think it's obvious. Because their jobs pay their bills. That's all there is to it. While I'm still on the topic, I want to talk about the even more recent program that's been announced by people like Bernie Sanders, and that is a jobs guarantee. And for the most part, I like what Bernie says, but this is definitely the wrong direction. It might be good short term as a bridge to people accepting that we need UBI, but it's only a good idea as an intermediary. And even then, I don't think we should implement this. We should not be creating pointless jobs as an excuse to give people money. And we also shouldn't be creating them as a way to give people a sense of purpose. Smashing two rocks together does not give somebody purpose. You might convince yourself it does because it keeps you busy during the day, but it doesn't. Or it shouldn't. Or there's something better you could do with your time. Losing that sense of purpose by not having a job, that's not why people are resistant to UBI, I think. I think people are against UBI because they're jealous, because they think that people don't deserve a handout of money unless you were miserable for 40 hours that week, like they were. And I think it's especially prominent in America, where we have the competitive attitude with our friends of who was more miserable at work this week. And we try to outdo each other in how awful we feel. So we get the sense that if I am more miserable, that means I earned my living more than any of you did. I don't blame them. If I was 50 years old and I'd been working for 30 years, 40 hours a week, every week, maybe some overtime, and I hated my job, and then I found out they were going to give $12,000 a year to people who don't even work, I would be pissed. But me being angry and jealous about it doesn't make it wrong. Things change. I believe that's the majority of people who would be against UBI. And there are some who are also against it because they think, where am I going to get my sense of purpose without a job if I can just do whatever I want? And sorry to tell you, but you're just going to have to find a new sense of purpose. Let's take the basic stuff. someone's a cashier. Their job actually is useful to other people. Their job matters. So there is a purpose to being a cashier, but I'm sure you'd agree that most cashiers themselves aren't happy about the fact that they have to spend time 20 hours or 40 hours a week being a zombie. It doesn't make them feel good knowing they helped someone avoid a longer line at the grocery store today. Sure, if you're an engineer at NASA, I'd imagine your job gives you a sense of purpose, and that's wonderful. But we can't live in a world without waiters, truck drivers, and cashiers. At least not yet. And when the day comes that we can, what are we going to tell these people who just got laid off to do? It's possible we can help teach them, or they can help themselves learn new skills that are needed to have a job in the next 10 to 20 years, or whenever they got replaced by AI in this situation. Or if we don't need more people in the workforce, they shouldn't be forced to be miserable. Just because people will say, if I have to be miserable to earn money, then so should everyone else. This really doesn't even matter for UBI, because whether you work or not, you'll get the same amount of money. And any work you do on top of that gets added to your baseline income. But then a new problem arises. Who's to say who should be working and who doesn't have to? Well, that is a big problem, and that's why UBI is only $12,000 a year, and that really isn't that much money to live on if you don't have a job supplementing it. So the motivation to work is not going to be lost on most people, because it's very difficult to live on $12,000 a year, I'd imagine. But this extra income will reduce at least some of the motivation that comes with needing a job. And we need as much as that as we can get in terms of fighting the power dichotomy with the corporations that hire people. There aren't enough public jobs for everyone, obviously, and how can we really have supply and demand with jobs in the private sector when everyone is quite literally forced to get a job in the first place? There's companies that people would rather work at than others, like I'd rather work at Google than Walmart, to take an extreme example. But there's still people who need to work at Walmart if no one else accepts them. Companies need employees to survive, but they don't have an obligation to make their working conditions ones that people enjoy or that people tolerate. Because, yeah, they're going to lose the best employees to Google, but they're still going to get employees because people have to work. You don't need to put in any effort to get employees, because there's always going to be people applying looking for work because they're looking for money. You can treat them like cattle, give them minimum wage, give them the worst working conditions possible without committing a human rights violation. And it's okay, because people will do it because they need money to survive. But with UBI, there's a little less pressure on people to submit themselves to these awful situations. And it forces companies to, at least the ones at the bottom of the ladder, to at least compete a little bit and try to get their conditions better and their wages better, because they're not going to get as many applicants. if there's people making $12,000 a year without having to work. There won't be as many minimum wage jobs. Sure, that might cut into some profits of grocery stores and retail stores, but they're going to make a lot of money back because poor people don't spend money as much as rich people. But if all poor people get a stipend of $12,000 a year, you can bet they might buy an extra few shirts. You can bet they might buy a car. You can bet they might start buying healthier food that costs more money. You can bet they might start their own business. Giving $1,000 a month to a billionaire isn't going to make that person spend more money at a business. Giving it to someone who makes $20,000 a year will most certainly make them spend more money. If you want to look at it from a business perspective and think about how much money can I make from this, well, rich people already spend as much as they want to spend, and they aren't going to spend that much more if they get an extra $12,000 a year. But poor people are an untapped money resource for businesses. They only spend on necessities, but if you give them more money, they will spend more on things they wouldn't have if they didn't have that UBI. UBI will also help coal miners whose jobs will disappear. It will help the taxi drivers who spent tons of money on their taxi medallions only to have them plummet in price because of Uber and Lyft. It will help the former Blockbuster workers. It's okay for people to lose their jobs if the business they're in has no reason to exist anymore. It's okay because they have UBI now, and they're not going to go homeless if they can't find a job. Alright, that's it from me. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.